Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And let me share my screen now. We'll have to juggle between screens today. Unfortunately, I have prepared something for all of us to participate. So now I'm sharing my screen, and my assumption is that everyone can see everything. And if not, then I'll wait for your screen. So
It's perfect.
basically, wonderful. Yes, I'm going to give you a very brief overview today about long COVID and lipids. Um, and of course, as a person from lipid field, I will basically start with presenting you lipids because I assume, and most of you who are interested in COVID due to your personal or work reasons already heard about COVID so much, but now it's my job to tell you a little more about lipids. So what are lipids? Lipids is a group of molecules, and basically it has many shapes and forms, but briefly we can say that it's a molecule that has a hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tails. What does it mean? That head of the lipids is prone to move towards the water, and hydrophobic tails are prone to move backwards from the water. And now lipids can have many different head groups. They can have different molecule structures, and to be honest, I don't even know how many lipids there are. It's hard for me to say, maybe thousands. So hydrophilic head is something that is basically staying more or less constant per lipid, and this is the way that we identify the lipid groups. And then hydrophobic tails can be different. They can have two so-called fatty acids. They can have one fatty acid, three, and sometimes even four. And this is how we basically distinguish the lipids within one head group. Now, there are more than 9,000 individual lipid species that can be produced, and that we overall can measure around maybe half of it. For the other half, there are other special methods that are needed, much more sensitive and much more specific, that can be done mostly in these hardcore research labs, not in the facility, or not in the high throughput facilities. And those only the things that we know of. So it's hard to imagine how many things we don't know of yet. Now, what is important that basically, and I think this part most of you have already heard about saturated lipids, non-saturated lipids, so-called unsaturated lipids. So basically, what we see is that if the fatty acids in the lipid are non-flexible, they called saturated. They don't have the specific bond in the fatty acid that allows the fatty acid to be more flexible. And then sometimes these fatty acids in one lipid can be all saturated. Sometimes, as you can see here, one can be saturated, another can be unsaturated, and sometimes they can be both unsaturated. So sometimes they can have this multiple flexibilities bonds. And so we know that unsaturated lipids are more on sort of a healthy side. At least that's what we see from all over the news and media. Now, what do lipids do in our body? First of all our cell membranes, each and every basically wall of our cell consists of lipids. And the more flexible, the more unsaturated these lipids are, the more fluid and adaptive our membranes are. So membrane fluidity depends on these lipids. So flexibility, whether the membrane can be flexible, also depends on the lipid. Sometimes lipid packing also can have can be sort of like can be causing some effects on the membrane functions. And of course, membrane thickness. Sometimes the more saturated fats there are, the more saturated lipids there are, the thicker the membrane and the less flexible it is. So basically, why it matters. As I mentioned, This matters because each and every cell of our body consists, the cell wall consists of our lipids, and then of course energy storage, something that all of you know, that our bodies need to store lipids and fats, and this is how we store energy basically. And yes, so this is usually stored within the body fats. Of course, also lipids through the skin and through also sometimes through this fat storage perform the insulation and protection. A very important non-energy storage role of lipids is hormonal production. Cholesterol and sterols are important compounds of some of our hormones. Also, vitamin absorptions. As we know, there are four vitamins that are fat soluble: A, D, E, and K, and they're not water soluble. That's why it's very important to consume this lipids within some fatty food, fatty compounds. Of course, brain and the nervous system health. All the wrap-ups around our brain cells consist of lipids, and of course metabolic regulation. Now, we do know that long COVID effect has an effect on organs. Of course, you all know about the COVID, and long COVID is something that happens after the active phase of infection. So typically we can talk about the recovery for patients who don't go through the long COVID, and then if the patient unfortunately goes through the long COVID, then we see that the recovery is delayed, and then even though there's no viral load, we still see antibodies. So according to the literature, according to what we know, long COVID affects particular organs. For example, brain, of course, lungs, kidneys, heart, gut. These are major organs that are affected during long COVID, and of course, blood in terms of the metabolism. Now, I have a question to all the participants here within the webinar. Since you see now that the long COVID effect affecting particular organs, my question to you is, if you can please screen the QR code with your phones, in where of these organs do you think lipids play a role? If you, I'm just testing it just in case, but if you use your camera and go to the Mentimeter webpage, you can see the question, lipids play a role in these organs in COVID. So please reply. Oh, this is only one. Yeah, this is interesting. Okay, let me double check. There is some, it should be multiple choice. This is interesting. I hope you can get this multiple choice answer. But if not, let's bet on your best choice. So let's see. Maybe some of you can yeah. This is interesting. When we tested it, it was multiple choice, but if not, then give us your best choice. Okay. Okay, we see some now brain is at the forefront. Okay, so I assume those of you who wanted to answer have already answered. Basically, the correct answer is all of these organs and in general metabolism. So all of you who answered any kind of answer were correct. Unfortunately, at this moment, somehow multiple choice wasn't possible, but in principle, during long COVID, we see the effect on all the organs, even though as patients we might not notice right away what we see in all the organs, but as doctors we usually see the effect on all the organs. So in terms of metabolism, we do see metabolic disorders. In terms of brain, we do see neurological damages and cognitive impairment. In lungs, of course, we see pulmonary function impairment, and myocarditis in heart, dysbiosis and compromised integrity in gut, and of course kidney injury. So we do see all these changes in the patient's health. Why do lipids matter there? Basically, they, as I already mentioned, matter because they play the role in energy metabolism, in signaling, and in inflammation. Now, what we have known so far, of course, as you can imagine, not many things have been published because publishing in academic and in medical science takes some time. But what we have already seen so far is that studies show that there are altered lipid profiles in plasma, including disruptions in fatty acid metabolism. Fatty acids are these tails I showed you, mitochondrial dysfunction, of course, and these all link to this persistent symptoms of fatigue and exercise intolerance. Also, plasma lipidomics can in general provide us knowledge about these changes and can allow us to identify specific lipid species with impaired metabolism and associated with impaired metabolism and chronic inflammation. And it helps us to understand in general the long COVID pathology. Now, as I already mentioned, long COVID influenced the plasma lipidome, and we do know that it influenced it through a combination of altered lipid metabolism. We never really see one lipid being changed. We always see a combination of lipids and some other molecules, some other mediators, and also we do see changes in fatty acids and the cholesterol level and potentially in the signaling. And there are many ways to study lipid metabolism. We in Lipotype use mass spectrometry, and this mass spectrometry-based lipidomic analysis allows to see these changes in particular lipid species, including those that are ceramides, which are important for signaling, and some other changes in sphingolipid metabolism. Basically, impaired energy metabolism that is of course associated with lipids, and also, of course, chronic immune dysregulation and low. So basically, what we do is that we aim to compare the energy metabolism and maybe all of these kind of things that are connected to long COVID and lipids from the long COVID patients and those who have successfully recovered from acute long COVID and didn't go into the long COVID. So basically, our role is to see the changes and maybe potentially, hopefully, to see the biomarkers for COVID-19 and long COVID progression. The biomarkers would mean that if we take the patient's blood in the hospital or using some panels at home, that we would see the 1, 3, 5 markers that would allow us to tell that the patient has or doesn't have the long COVID. Again, we wanted to analyze the lipidome profile of individuals to be able to differentiate between COVID-infected, recovered, and long COVID patients to see the biomarker. We now are working with 3 different cohorts. Altogether, you see it's around 1,500 samples. And basically, what we first need to do is to take the sample and extract only lipid from the samples, because first we need to make sure that nothing else affects our signal. Then we run it through a heavy machinery, and further we of course need to do data analysis. So we see some signals and we need to transform the signal into something that we can quantify and say, okay, these are ceramides, these are sphingomyelins, these are other lipids, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we need to brush it and put it into a nice data that we can report. The whole process is then that plasma has been acquired, plasma samples from the patients. Then, as I mentioned, mass spectrometry-based lipid analysis. Then we need to see that this kind of peaks that you see here on this graph are particular lipids, and then perform data analysis. In the red circle, I pointed out the one stage that we're currently at. So we have now ran the mass spectrometry based analysis, and now we're taking care of identifying, of transferring this visual peaks into the lipids that we can name, and then we can say, okay, this is this lipid with this many fatty acids, this tails, and this is another lipid with this other head group, and that many fatty acid tails of this particular quantity. So Lena has already mentioned that there will be next year another webinar where we hope to participate and to be able to basically share with you the results of this study, and be able to say, basically, I'm hoping to move this red square, so red form, red shape, by the next webinar somewhere here to the data analysis, or maybe even further to say which exact lipids do we see, and which kind of sum of lipids would allow us to tell whether the patient has long COVID, or maybe if we're lucky, whether there's some predisposition for long COVID in particular patients. So this is something that I wanted to share with you, to share what we as Lipotype are doing in this project, where is our role, and which stage of the project we're at. Again, I know that maybe is not too much, but this is the best we have. This research takes a lot of time, a lot of coordination and coordinated efforts. So please stay tuned for the updates. I really, really hope that next year we'll be able to share with you the results of this study. This would be all from my side. I'll be staying here till the end of the talks. I'll be happy to take your questions as much as I can answer them with my background and my knowledge. And overall, I'll be happy to stay in touch, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions.